You may have noticed since my last video that my dog's grown quite a lot. So this may be the last time you're going to see her. She's sitting on my knee because she's getting rather large. But what, oh dear, we're tired. Such a hard life being a puppy. What we're going to show you in this video is how to make a bolster cushion. Off you go. This is it. I love the fabric. It's from the Craft Cotton Company. And I've made the cushion so that the ends actually go in. So it's got some shape to it. So I'm going to show you how I do that and a little bit of a trick as to some things that you can use to create it. It's ever so simple to make. It doesn't have to be all fun and bright colours. You can make this in any kind of fabric that you like. And I've just used some foam on the inside as well, just to give it a little bit of stability. And it means that you can make it in any size that you like. So you can have huge ones or small ones or whatever you like. Smaller ones actually look really nice if you just have them at the back of your dining table, if you had all 4 or 6 of them all matching. And of course you could, if you wanted to add a tassel onto the end. So whether it's the bedroom, the dining room, the living room, I think you've got a fabulous bolster cushion, and I'm going to kind of demystify the way that these are made. Here we go. So this is what we're going to use in the centre of the bolster cushion, and it's actually a foam that's used for insulating pipes. So I got it from a DIY store, and the nice thing is it comes in really long length, so you can make the cushion any size that you like. So let me measure mine. I've cut it down to 12 inches for this one. And I'm going to wrap around it some polyester foam. I'm not normally a fan of this stuff. Doesn't feel very nice, but it's nice and thick and it's got a high loft, so it's perfect for making cushions with. And what I need to do is to cut the foam slightly longer than my insulating tube. So just around about 1 inch or 1.5 inches either end. And then, or I could even fold this in half actually. This is about 1/2 inch thick and it's folded over double already. What you need to do is to cut that little bit longer and then just start to roll. And when your bolster is the size that you want it to be, so you can have a really fat one, you can have a long skinny one, that's entirely up to you, then you're going to cut it off. Now when you cut off the end, what you don't want is where you've wrapped this around to have one big bunch of wadding right across the edge to make a ridge. So what I've done with mine is to separate it slightly so that when the first one rolls over, this is at the end remember, it's a little bit shorter, the next one's a little bit longer, the next layer's that little bit longer, and then glue them all in place. Then you get more of a smooth line going around your foam. So let me just move that out of the way and I can show you one that I've already glued. And this is it. So again, slightly longer than the foam, and you can just about see all of those layers there. And I've just used some fabric glue. This is a Gutermann HT2, just underneath there, just to hold it in place. This isn't going to go in the wash. The cover's not going to come off, so it doesn't matter if you use a little bit of glue on there. Now the buttons and the cord that go through the centre, this is why it's useful having the tube, are these. Now I haven't got very pretty buttons, so I'm going to cover them, but you do need them to be quite large, because when the end of the bolster cushion all gathers up, depending on the thickness of your fabric, you're going to have a hole at the end, so your button needs to be big enough to cover over that hole. So mine's about 1.5 inches across. So 2 buttons, one for each end, obviously, and then some really strong cord. This is just a jewellery line. You can use beading cord, embroidery thread, fine string, something that's really strong so when you pull it it's not going to snap. And this needs to be a little more than twice the length of your tube. Okay, so I need to drop this through the centre of the tube, so I need something with a little bit of weight on it. I'm just going to use a pen. And like so. So that just goes right down the middle. And do that. Then we'll take it through one of the buttons, and I'm going to cover the button afterwards because otherwise I won't be able to get the cord through the button. Back onto my pen. Doesn't have to be a pen, just something that's a little bit weighty. And then back into the tube. And then through the second button on the other end. There you go. Okay, and I'm just knotting the end of those off so the button doesn't come off. And then to cover them, I don't want to see the texture of the button either, so I've got a little piece of wadding here. Not as thick as the polyester, this is just a cotton one. You could use a little bit of felt or something like that. And I've got some fabric that I'm going to cover the button with, which I've cut to about twice the size of the button. Doesn't have to be exact. Oh, no, sorry, that needs to be cut to the size of the button. So just make that a little bit smaller. There. So my wadding's just going to, it's about 1/4 of an inch bigger than the button all the way around, so that's just going to wrap around the top. Just makes it a little bit more luxurious. I'll put some glue on here. Don't put glue over the cord in the middle, because when it dries you won't be able to pull it through. So just a little squirt of glue around the edge of the button. Won't take long to dry, and that's just going to hold that wadding in place. And then take your piece of fabric, which is cut to about twice the size of the button, and I'm just going to make a running stitch around the edge. My stitches are around about 1/4 of an inch apart. Doesn't matter how small or how tidy they are. You're not going to see these, they're all going to be underneath the button. And I'm sewing them about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. Okay, and if you can find a button that matches your fabric perfectly, then you're quids in, aren't you? But this is an easy way to coordinate buttons if you don't have any that match already. And these buttons actually came from a huge bag of buttons that I bought. And because they were grey, I needed grey buttons, and I don't like any one of them. I don't like the colour of the grey. So instead of throwing them away, I'm just repurposing them, if you like. Okay, so that goes around the edge of my button, and then pull it up together. And they're nice and tight. And again, you're not going to see the back of this, so don't worry about how neat your stitches are at the back. And I'll just tie that off. There you go. So I need to do the same with the other end, with the second button. Leave this nice and loose at the moment. Then you're going to take your wadding or your padding and wrap that around and glue it in place. And then you're left with this. So this is going to be the size of my bolster, and you can see I've got the buttons dangling either end like so. So we'll pull those in later on. So measure it. So we're going to measure the length, and mine is 15 inches. And we're going to measure all the way around. Don't pull it too tight, because it's tempting to do that, but just quite a loose fit if you like. And mine again is 15 inches, so it's 15 inches across and 15 inches round. So I'm going to cut one piece of fabric, which is 15.5 inches across, because that allows for 2/4 of an inch seam allowances. With the seam allowances, that will mean that my fabric fits perfectly to the length. And I'm going to cut the other piece 15.5 inches round, which again will allow for the seam allowances when that's sewn together. One more measurement before I show you how I've cut the fabric. And that's straight across the end here. This is the little bit that's going to be gathered. So mine measures, say 5 inches there. And again, don't pull that too tight. So I'm going to need a piece of fabric to go all the way around that meets halfway with a hem. That might sound a bit confusing. So my fabric is going to be 15.5 inches round, because that was the girth of my bolster, remember. Half of my 5 is 2.5, so that's going to be the finished size that I want for the little bit that's gathered around the end. But then I'll need to add a hem and a seam allowance. So 2.5 inches, I'm going to cut 3.5 inches just to be on the safe side. I don't want it to be too small. That'll make sense when I start putting it all together. So this is my large piece of fabric that's going to wrap all the way around my bolster. And I thought, even though it's a very bright and heavily patterned fabric, I want to break that up a little bit. So I've also cut a plain piece of fabric, which I'm going to wrap around the middle like so. And just to add a little bit of interest, I'm going to add some rickrack to either side. So this fabric would have been 15.5 inches all the way around, and I've cut it 6 inches wide. Don't have to do that if you don't want to. I just thought it made it look a little bit more interesting. Then the pieces for the ends of my bolster, I've got 2 of these. And these again measure 15.5 inches all the way around by 3.5 inches deep. And those are the ones that are going to gather like so. So that's why I need a hem on the end of there, and then the button's going to cover it over. Now, because I've chosen the same fabric for the bolster and the end of the bolster, I just want to break that seam up a little bit as well. So I've cut a strip of fabric 1 inch wide, folded it in half and pressed it, and that's just going to make a nice little border just around the edge here. So just like a little bit of a trim. You could put some piping in there if you wanted to. Right, so let's start piecing all of this together. The first thing I'm going to do is to add the rickrack. There we go. So the rickrack's going to be sewn either side of my fabric strip. And the way to do this is to sew the rickrack right over the edge of the fabric, and then stitch down the centre so that when this folds back, you just see the little lumpy bits, so it creates like a frill on the other side. So I'll just pin that in place and then we'll get sewing. Right, so remember I'm sewing straight down the centre of the rickrack. You could sew just off centre as well if you just wanted the kind of the tiny little points poking up. So if you've not used rickrack before, have a practice and see what it looks like. And this is a jumbo rickrack. It does come in different sizes, smaller and even bigger as well. Right. So normally I'd fold that over and just press it, but you can see it just gives that, it's quite nice, isn't it? It just gives like a frilled effect down the side of the fabric. So this is going to go straight across the centre of my main fabric. Looks about central to me. Let me just measure that. Yeah, spot on. So I'll hold that in place. So if you iron it, then that's going to be a bit easier than doing it this way, but it'll be fine. And then I'll fold that edge back, and I'm just going to top stitch this in place. There, so start with the needle in the down position, and that means that when you're manoeuvring, particularly if you're going around corners, then your stitch line carries on in a straight line. You don't get any missed bits. Almost there. You could make huge ones, couldn't you? If you're spending a lot of time in bed, if you're pregnant, or if you're convalescing, or if your back's giving you a little bit of jip and you need that extra support, you could have your custom made one to match your pyjamas or to match your bedroom. Great fun for the kids' rooms as well. A nice gift idea. They don't have to be pretty and pink and girly. You could easily make these from something a little bit more masculine, so maybe a ticking or denim, or nothing too scratchy. And then you've got quite an impressive gift for anybody. If you've got any spray fabric adhesive, you could have held this strip in place with that as well, if you're not too fond of the pins. So that's the decorative panel finished. Like so. Then we're going to put these little green borders on either end. So raw edges together. I do need to cut these down. I made them a bit large, or long, I should say. I find with things like this that it's easier not to pin, because I can actually hold the raw edges together as I'm sewing. But if you want to kind of belt and braces a little, then stick some pins in there as well. Sometimes it's more time consuming to pin than it is to actually sew. There's one. Chop that off. And then this one along the opposite side. I'm using the Butterick sewing machine, by the way. This is the first sewing machine of the Butterick range, so it's all very exciting, which is available on Create and Craft in the UK and should be available on Create and Craft in the USA shortly. So keep watching the channel. Should be popping up sometime in September. All right, so chop, 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 chop. You go there. That's that. Right. So we need to do the bits that gather at the end. Now, if this was going to be a bolster cushion that I was going to take off, that needed laundering, or that maybe even I was selling, I'd hem the top over twice. But just be aware that the more times you fold this over to hem, and the thicker the fabric maybe that you're using, the bigger the hole's going to be where you gather it, because you've got more fabric gathering up. So with my cushion, I'm going to fold this over once by 1/2 inch, and then use that as my hem. So I know I've got a raw edge there, but this isn't going to come off the cushion cover, so I don't mind that at all. And when you sew the hem, sew quite close to the edge, because you're going to put a cord through here to gather it. So I'm going to reduce my stitch length a little bit, down to number 2, just because it is a raw edge and it will help stop any fraying. It won't fray, but it will help. Wobbly table. I need to adjust my legs. The table legs, not my legs. I'll go straight onto the second piece. So again, fold over by 1/2 inch. I'm doing it by eye. Measure and pin if you wish. There, I'll chop that off. Now these two pieces are going to go over that trim that I put either end of my cushion, right sides together, and then trapping the trim in between the two pieces. So when this is opened up, all I see is that nice green stripe. Now you'll find it easier this time to flip your work over and sew from the reverse side, because I can see the sewing line that I've already got, so I can sew straight on top of that. If I sew from this side, I can't see where the green strip is, so I won't be sure that I'm not sewing too much or too little of it. So I'm going to sew just inside the stitch line that I've already made. You'll probably find that easier than trying to sew straight on top of the same stitch line. So I'll just check that I've got the right amount of green showing, because I just wanted a thin, oh that looks nice. I just wanted a thin line of the green fabric, and that's worked absolutely perfectly. That's just what I wanted. But at this point, if I've just got a thread there. If you're not happy with it, then you can always unpick it and sew it again. So just keep turning your work over and checking. Okay, so these two pieces again, right sides together. From the side I've already sewn. Some very fine piping cord would have been nice inside here. You can buy it that's about 1/8 of an inch, so if you wanted it to be a little bit more prominent or a little bit more raised, then that would be a good option. I think that's looking great. So before I actually sew this into a tube, which would be the next step, I'm just going to nip off and give this a little bit of a press. I'll be back in a second. Right, so just snipping off my threads, make it nice and tidy. Before I sew this together in a tube, I'm going to make sure it fits by taking my pad, just making sure that where those seams are in the right place, and that I've got enough room for this to gather at the ends, and it's all looking really good. Because at this point you can add a little bit more or take it away, or just, it's like when you're making an outfit for yourself and you keep trying it on, just make sure it fits. Right, so this is then sewn together into a tube, and I'm going to start sewing from my seam line here, so I've got a gap in the end so I can get my cord through to gather it. It will leave the ends raw. It's behind the button, you're not going to see those, so I'm not concerned about that. As I'm sewing these pieces together, the green fabric that I put in as the border, I've pressed outwards on both sides, and I need to make sure that when I sew, those seams line up. I know I say it a lot, but if your seams match absolutely perfectly, no one notices. They notice when they don't. Okay. So to make sure those stitches don't come undone, just a couple of stitches backwards before you go forwards. Stop with your needle down. Just make sure those two pieces are lined up perfectly. Same with the decorative panel down the centre, because you can ease this in a little bit. Easing is just pulling one side of the fabric or the other slightly to make things meet. Perfectly acceptable. That needs easing a little bit more. Make sure they're facing the same way. There we go. And again, when I get to this seam, few stitches backwards. So that's it with the sewing machine. Let's turn this the right side out and fit it. You might want to press that seam. Okay, so this should slip nice and snugly inside the tube. Oops, with the button pushed out of the way. You can always give that a press when it's finished actually. Or just steam it over, be fine. Right, let's pull it through. Careful not to pull the tube out of the middle. Right, so my buttons are hanging off, good, ready to go. So that's central. Just make sure it's straight. Lovely. I'm going to use the same cord that I used for the buttons in the centre to gather this with. It could be something like buttonhole cotton or just something really strong. And I'll need a safety pin and just thread this through a knot on the end. And then take that through the opening that I left at the end of the cover. So just coming around to the final end, just make sure I don't pull the cord out. Okay, so we take the safety pin off. My button's still dangling out of the end, and I'm just going to pull these ends as tight as I can to gather them, and then tie that in a knot. This is why you need strong thread. Okay, so I'll trim the ends of the knot off slightly and then just push those ends of the cords inside the hole just to make them neat. Right, so I've already done the other end while you were busy. So now we need to make the ends go in a little bit to give it a little bit of shape. So if I pull the button from this end, the opposite end is going to sink in. And then from this side, I need to pull the thread through the button and pull it in from this side as well. So I'm just going to snip those open. I only tied the ends of that cord, remember, to stop the buttons from dropping off. And we'll tie that into a knot. And again, pull that nice and tight. Oh, I love the way that looks. Look, I've just got a piece of that cord sticking out. Pop that behind the button. Ready? Okay, here we go. So this is why the tube was cut slightly shorter than the foam, because now the buttons are kind of sinking into the size of the foam and into that padding. Right, I need to try and knot this while it's tight, so you may need somebody with an extra finger to help there, because I need that knot to go right round the back of the button. I'll tie another one just in case. There we go, and then I'll tease the button forward and snip off the cord. Just give that a little bit more of a shape. There, bolster's finished.